If you would like to write down your questions while you're listening so that you don't forget, or if at the end we run out of time, you can add your contact information, and we will make sure that we'll respond to everybody as quickly as possible. I'm going to go ahead and start it off with Stacey.
Thank you, Marlene. I'll go ahead and take this off so you guys can hear me, since I'm not very tall to speak over all of you guys. My name is Stacey Shainer. I'm a captain with the Tucson Police Department. I've been with the department for about 17 and a half years now, so it's been a long time. I've held a variety of assignments, but really relative to this ward is I started off as a lieutenant for Operations Division West. I was the Downtown Entertainment District Lieutenant back in 2019 to mid-2020. I then moved over to the Chief's office, where I was the Patrol Services Executive Officer, and in that role I had command over the mental health support team, the homeless outreach team, and the substance use resource team, or MIST, CERT, and HOT, as you guys may have heard. And then recently, as of the beginning of February, there was a reorganization of bureaus within the department, and I moved over with Assistant Chief Kevin Hall into the new bureau, which is called the Special Services and Innovation Bureau. Basically, the role of that bureau is to use data and analysis and evidence-based practices to find different ways to solve problems within the community. So whether it's reducing violent crime or preventing violent crime, or whether it's responding to more social aspects of community needs, such as homelessness or mental health or substance use. We're trying to do so in an efficient manner and evidence-based manner using those types of practices. We also have emergency management within that section, as well as our wellness department internally. So that's internal wellness for employees, behavioral sciences unit, and such as that. So just kind of a brief overview of that. Jason couldn't be here tonight, and I jumped in front of Jack because I wanted to do kind of the overview of the 3 units and how those came into play, and then I'll let Jack talk a little bit more about the operations, the day-to-day. He's really the face of the homeless outreach unit. So the outreach units are made up of 3 units, like I mentioned before. It started with the mental health support team back in about 2013. Their main role is to serve mental health court orders or revocations that come in, as well as to do case management and resource navigation and assistance for criminal cases and those involving individuals that are struggling with mental health, in order to loop in the right resources to help them through that process. We as a department believe that we can't arrest away our problems, and so we try to coordinate with the appropriate resources to give a better response to the community. Back in about 2018, that unit was doubled, but they noticed that there was a need for a focus on substance use disorder. And so that's where the substance use resource team came to play. They run our deflection program, which is a pre-arrest diversion or deflection program. So if certain criminal offenses are present, or possession of narcotics, personal use narcotics, or paraphernalia, there is the opportunity to divert that individual straight to treatment. So we can transport them 24/7 over to Kodak or to CBI or to other community providers. And so we work with University of Arizona on a study related to that. They also do case follow-up on non-fatal overdoses, as well as Narcan training and education. And then in 2020, beginning of 2020, Jack was a sergeant over here in the West Side Division, and realized that we needed a better focus on the unsheltered individuals in our community to better respond to them. So he pitched to the chief's office an idea of having a homeless outreach team, and he's run with that. He's created a lot of amazing partnerships and works his butt off out there in the streets, trying to get to the various complaints within the community to help solve those, as well as working with the divisions. It's not an easy task by any means, but he can speak a little bit further on that. If you have any questions for me later, or even after the fact, I can leave my contact information. Happy to speak at any time. Thank you.
My name is Jack Jelson. I'm a sergeant with the TBD. I've been here for about 10 years. I started as a patrol officer in Midtown, which is part of Ward 3's in Midtown. Then I went to narcotics as a detective, became a patrol sergeant here in the West Side Division, which is the other part of Ward 3. So kind of became very aware of man, we're responding, as an officer, I was like, well, we respond to I deal with a lot of homeless individuals on a daily basis. And then as a sergeant, you're kind of tasked with seeing this event board, with all the calls that we have to take and all the and I'm like, wow, like half these calls have to deal with homeless individuals, maybe even 2/3 of them. And there's like a lot more than we can handle. So I talked to the chief and an executive leadership team, and I said, can we maybe have a unit that works with some of the other agencies that work with homeless, and not just the social service agencies, but the cleanup departments, because it's one thing to deal with the homeless on a criminal basis and an enforcement basis, but you also have to solve their underlying problems, mental health issues, unemployment issues, substance use issues, and then after all that's done, what do the citizens want? What do you guys, what makes it that you complain about is the mess, right? Like the immense, 3-ring circus tarps with shopping carts everywhere. Trust me, we go into them. I think me and my guys in our pickup truck took like 50,000 pounds of trash last year to the dump alone, just with our pickup truck, just to help chip in. And, which isn't part of our responsibility, right, as an officer, but it's something we want to do to kind of like set the example of, hey, this is interagency collaboration. And that's what kind of our unit, as well as the rest of the units in Corps, are about. Homelessness really isn't a police issue, it's a social issue, but what happens is it gets out of hand, and who do people call? 911, right? Traditionally, officers, they were like, well, there's a guy in the alley with a tent. Okay, he's got a warrant, so I can take him to jail. Sweet, I have a solution for tonight. And or, hey, let's go, I'm gonna give you 20 minutes, pack your stuff, go to the next alley, or go down the street, and then he'd be back, or go to the next alley, and it would go from her problem to his problem. And that would just be a cycle, right? We weren't talking with the proper resources. So we've been working with Homeless Protocol. We've been working with tons of social service agencies. We've been working with cleanup departments to try to streamline this response, because it's a very complex problem. It involves a lot of different departments, and so it requires a complex solution. But we're trying to streamline and simplify as best we can and make sure that we keep you, the citizen, aware of what our process is, because we don't want to give unrealistic expectations. Several times people have said, why can't you just clean that up the next day? It's like, well, we actually have a legal process that we have to go through before we can evict them from public property. It actually takes, TDOT, or Environmental Services time to get out there and clean it. So we want to make sure that, although it may take longer than you might like, or it may be a different process than you may think is happening, we want you to be aware of that process so that at least that we are working on it, and we are trying to take your input and improve our processes more. One of the things that probably we've done best is, like Captain Shainer was talking about, was improving our partnerships, right? We've heard one city, one team and all that. And these other folks here are a great example that we've worked with. OPCS, you've got Tom Litwicki from OPCS, Jason Thorpe from Housing Community Development, same with Brandy Champion. A lot of these individuals, Sarah and Kelly, have also worked with us recently, but a lot of these individuals helped me build this program and helped me interact with other resources that I never had the chance to interact with before. That's just to improve efficiency, right? Kelly in particular, and I'll let her talk about her role with us in homelessness, but she's our basically dedicated housing navigator. A lot of these folks need case management. They need that wraparound service, and they need that attention and that in-depth follow-up to help solve their underlying issues. And you're not going to get that with a police officer, right? The police are going to get called for it, but we're not going to visit that person day after day and make sure that and we don't have the resources to provide them anyway as a police department. So we'll work with someone like Kelly and say, hey, we got this referral. We'll go out with you and say, hey, this person needs this type of shelter, this person needs this housing assessment done. She'll work with us, and we work with others as well, but we want to get that in-depth follow-up to make sure that we're not just kicking the can down the street or just spinning our wheels or just contributing to this homeless cycle of re-traumatization through the criminal justice system. That doesn't mean every homeless person gets a get out of jail free card because you're homeless. No, we still have the opportunity as police officers to balance outreach with enforcement. And that's where the police officer, I think, is a valuable tool. I can't have these folks here go out and arrest somebody for something that needs to be an arrestable offense, right? We, on the other hand, we can do that, and then we can also try to do what the outreach workers do and refer them to those services. So I think that's where the police officer is extremely valuable, and that's what we tried to fashion on our police department, is making sure officers are thinking instead of just very narrow-minded, traditional, hey, let's just arrest the problem away. We're trying to expand those horizons and widen our view and work with these other agencies. So a lot of you will probably email me. I'm sure there's probably plenty of people in here who have emailed me about stuff. We try to be as responsive as we can. There are staffing issues. I don't need to go into those numbers and all that, and there are issues with affordable housing, but we are working as a team, and just in the last 2.5 years, I think the collaboration has just gone through the roof. I'm very proud to have been a part of that and to work with all these folks here as well, and to work with the citizens and be a part of these types of meetings where I can engage you guys and kind of get ideas, because probably the best ideas I've got are from citizens that say, hey, have you ever thought of this? Or, hey, this isn't working, or that, this is something you could do better. That's stuff that I love, because that helps me do my job, because sometimes I'm not seeing it from the same view you guys are. So I encourage that input to us, as long as it's constructive, and I will do the same. I'll let you know feedback and give you kind of a chance to ride along with us if you want to, if you're really interested in that. But I'm all about that transparency. So I appreciate you guys having me here. Obviously there'll be time for questions later, so I look forward to that. Thank you.
I just want to piggyback on what Jack said. We also, Housing First, collaborates with Homeless Protocol. That position's actually seated on our team. So they manage a dashboard. Jack is also in that dashboard that pinpoints these homeless encampments throughout the community. We have a Homeless Protocol email that constituents, ward offices, other people can file their complaint into, and then we send outreach out to assess that site to see what we need to do next, who needs to clean it up. And that's mostly our team's job, is to collaborate that cleanup, see what the next steps are. We also provide resources. Our team works with Kelly, doing some outreach, some navigation into housing. Our team provides low-demand shelter options, utilizing Old Pueblo Community Services and other shelters throughout the community. We recently started a shelter at the Wildcat Inn that's city-operated. We have about 62 folks there now that are starting to transition out into housing, working with the Public Housing Authority and other housing providers in the community. And I have to say to Jack, I'm really happy to see the collaboration between all the different departments, because it's environmental services, DTM, code enforcement, Pima County, ADOT, all of them, and TPD too. So we're just trying to take the load for resources off of TPD, work with Sarah, my colleague here in Community Health and Safety and Wellness, and get this directed better than we've been doing in the past. So that's what we're working on here. And I'm going to hand it over to...
Hold on, Brandy. May I ask you to give a little explainer about Housing First,
okay,
and to speak up a little bit for those in the back?
Okay. So Housing First is, you come into housing or low demand, low barrier shelter with no preconditions. So housing of the past used to be you had to have sobriety, you had to no pets, you couldn't bring your spouse, or you and your spouse were separated and put at different locations. And Housing First focuses on the human. So we meet them where they're at. If they're using, we work on that later. We get you immediately into a low demand shelter situation, or into housing if you've been selected for housing at that point, and work with you to collect documents and get you moving no matter how long that takes. And it's just about continued engagement and getting this person from being unsheltered to shelter.
My name is Jason Thorpe. I work with the City of Tucson Housing and Community Development Department, where I oversee our Planning and Community Development Division. And so I get the great joy of working with all the folks here and a couple of familiar faces in this room. But our team really, we're kind of the nerds behind the scenes. So I began my career working in homelessness about 20 years ago now, and realized pretty quickly direct services, folks that were jumping into the wash, talking things out, helping folks struggle through day to day wasn't the work for me, but I contributed differently. And so our team is really a group of folks who contribute differently, and we focus on funding and then and really bringing the greatest minds in the city and from around the country together to create new solutions to address homelessness locally. So the Planning and Community Development Division, there are about 30 of us who focus specifically on homelessness, affordable housing, and low-income homeowner services. And so we, in terms of homelessness specifically, we provide grant funding to many of the nonprofits that you may be familiar with, many of the organizations, both CBI and OPCS who are here. And then we also, and so that grant funding supports things from street outreach to emergency shelters to longer term housing programs for folks that may have prolonged disabilities and extreme housing barriers, and all sorts of sort of services in between. So some of the work, Jack's talked about partnerships with CBI and with OPCS in terms of outreach efforts. So we fund some of those partnerships so that those organizations have the staff capacity to be able to provide that kind of support to work with city departments. And so our aim there really is knowing that the greatest expertise and the skill to work one-on-one with folks is so often living in our nonprofit partners. And so we really want to resource that so that people can do that work well. Then aside from funding, the other key activity that we manage is the local continuum of care known as the Tucson Pima Collaboration to End Homelessness. So the Tucson Pima Collaboration to End Homelessness is a 50-member coalition of local organizations, government agencies, nonprofits, businesses, and individual community members that are really working together to try to find solutions to homelessness. And so that group distributes about a little over $10 million a year to local nonprofits and government partners for funding for homeless services, and then also is really recognized by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development as the regional planning body related to homelessness. So that's where folks come together, but I think almost everyone on this panel is involved in a committee somehow with the coalition, where folks come together and really try to push best practices and support our nonprofit partners in terms of providing training resources for staff, things like that, and then developing sort of long-range planning related to homelessness, so kind of how we need to use community resources and what types of interventions, how much shelter do we need versus how much long-term housing or homelessness prevention might we need. So that's really the work of our team, is trying to forge the best solution we can for Tucson, but doing that really from a place of partnership with our partners across the city, at the county, the state, and especially a nonprofit and the community.
My name is Sarah Lanius. I'm the director of the Community Safety, Health, and Wellness Program, which actually functions as an umbrella over all of the city folks who you've heard from tonight. They all touch it in different ways. So it is an interdepartmental program housed out of the city manager's office that includes the 3 direct service teams from TPD and the Housing First program, as well as the TC3 team at the Tucson Fire Department. They are all dynamic teams doing really amazing work and comprised of some real powerhouse professionals. So it is a great honor to get to work with them and to try and strengthen the impact that they are already having, right? And also find ways for us to kind of build into some of the gaps that do exist in our community. So I want to, before I go into a little bit more detail there, I just want to kind of stop and just acknowledge that I see a lot of different neighborhoods represented here tonight. Like, thank you for being here. Also just want to flag for folks who might not know that we have staff here tonight, both from the mayor's office, from the Ward 1 office, and from the District 5 office. Thank you so much for being here. And we've got some pretty remarkable city employees that are here too that you might not know about because they're not up here speaking. But our independent police auditor is here. Mitch, you want to raise your hand? Thank you for being here. We've got one of our finest code inspectors here. I'm totally putting you on the spot. Thank you, thank you. And we have Officer Hould, who I know many of you probably know from Operations Division West out there, and also Lane Mandel out behind Kristen, who is Mr. Ortega's Chief of Staff. Thank you for being here. I think, anyway, I just wanted to kind of mention, like, this is an important topic, right? And I think we all understand that it is an important topic, and it's one that we work on really intimately and oftentimes in ways that are not visible. So we really appreciate being able to be here tonight and to share with you. And much appreciation to Councilmember Dahl and his team for hosting us here tonight. So the Community Safety, Health, and Wellness Program, I mentioned before that it's really kind of an interdepartmental program. We are in the process of growing. So, in a few months, when we come together again for something like this, I will have a lot more details to provide. But we are in the process of building out some additional teams to really help make sure that folks who Brandy is working with right? So, and she didn't go into as much detail. I mean, her team, they're literally going into encampments, working with people, building relationships, because they have to build that trust, right? A lot of times folks have had not awesome experiences in some of the services available. So they're really building those relationships. Sometimes it can take months. And then getting people to exit out of the camp on their own and into low barrier, non-congregant shelter settings where they can really feel much more human, quite frankly, in a more dignified space, a space where they have a door that they can close, right? They have autonomy. They have some ability to make decisions for themselves. And so we are building out a team of care coordinators who, once folks are able to graduate from the low demand shelter systems that Brandy's team is running, it will be my team that will provide that ongoing social work case management support to folks so that we can make sure that they're going to be successful in housing. So that's partnering, of course, with our service providers who are already working in those fields, like Tom's team, but also knowing too that some of the folks that we're working with right now, given the current environment in Tucson, there aren't always the traditional resources available for all of them, right? So sometimes we have to be really creative. And so part of what the city is trying to do is to figure out how do we help to fill the gap so that we can work with a landlord who will be more open to providing some special accommodation to house people, right? Because that's what we see has to happen right now, right? There are some real limits that we face in terms of housing availability. So we are being really creative about not only how do we build it ourselves, how do we partner with others to build it, but then how do we try and create an environment where folks can really succeed and be able to access housing? Because that's what Housing First is about. It's not about keeping people in perpetual shelter. It's about really allowing them to be able to be successful in housing and respecting them along that process, right? Whatever that might look like for them. So we're building out a team of care coordinators that will be working with Brandy's folks, but then also really critical doing some follow-up work with folks who are utilizing our 911 system at a high level, and other areas that are kind of weedy that I won't go into. But one of the things that we realize in the city is that there are a lot of folks who have complex needs, and working with just one particular resource is often not sufficient, and sometimes they need someone who can help be the glue between multiple resources. And so we're building out a team that can help to provide that to folks. We believe that they'll be able to be more successful based on how they define success if they have appropriate support. We're also in the process of building a team of community organizers that will be working in areas that have experienced historically high rates of gun violence, not directly related to homelessness, but part of our broader approach throughout the program to really try and bring additional tools and resources to prevent crises and reduce violence, right? Because it is a very real concern for many of our neighbors. What else do I want to say? We're just getting started, and there's a lot more ahead. There's a lot to be done. I know you know that. That's why you're here. So we really we appreciate all of the work that each of you have done, really trying to make sure that your neighborhood is a place that is welcoming to all, and we want to help you be more successful. So as we are continuing to build out the Community Safety, Health, and Wellness program, we're very interested in partnering with you as you identify gaps that you really think need to be filled. We will do our best to try and help make that happen, whether it's directly through us or through leveraging additional resources. That's kind of what we're all about.
Hi, my name is Kelly Ross. I'm a lead navigator with Community Bridges. I started off at CBI in 2019 as a peer support specialist in the crisis detox unit. I did that for about 8 months. From there, I was promoted to an outreach specialist where it consisted of a team of myself and 3 other people. We would spend our shift driving around through alleys, abandoned buildings, camps, if we spotted camps, to try to kind of meet people where they're at and build a rapport and honestly get them into, the main goal with outreach was to try to connect them with detox and mental health services, considering majority of the homeless population does struggle with one or the other. From there, I was asked to start this grant with TPD. And that began in August of 2021. So I took that position. I'm kind of so now I'm a lead navigator and I'm solo on this grant working with TPD, but I meet up with Jack's team each day, either Josh or Jake, and follow them to different encampments in town. I'm there to, offer to complete housing assessments, the ISODATs, try to encourage people to obtain detox, mental health or shelter services as well. Just to give you guys an idea of some numbers, the goal when I started this grant in August of 2021 was to just serve 75 people within a year of the grant. It hasn't even been a year yet. We're in June. The amount of engagements I've specifically spoke to out with TPD has been 395. The number of housing assessments I've completed and entered into HMIS have been 246. Let's see here. To my knowledge, out of all those people that I've completed housing assessments on, 17 people have been matched with housing. Again, I put my number in HMIS to be contacted if people get matched that I do SPDATs on. I don't always receive.
Do you want to let them know what HMIS and a SPDAT is?
Oh yeah, a SPDAT is a housing assessment. It's a series of questions based on somebody's homelessness. Once I enter it into HMIS, they get a score. Some range from the lower end, 4 to 7, up to the higher end, up to 14. Based on the score, they get assistance with rapid rehousing, which is more short-term housing through different agencies, or for the higher scores, long-term supportive housing. I've noticed that a lot of the vets I do SPDATs housing assessments on, almost every one of them have been matched. Also the youth, which is 18 to 24, have had high numbers with them as well. The quickest somebody has been matched is a youth female I did one on. She was matched a week later, which was really awesome. I've gotten a call from an agency from somebody I did a housing assessment on a year ago, who actually got matched a year later. So the number of people I have been able to get into shelter successfully has been 16, about 10 people into detox. Amount of people successfully housed or in the process of being housed has been 9. So that's the numbers I was able to kind of crunch. It's not, it probably doesn't sound like a lot out of the 395 engagements, but it's better than none from when TPD first started this and didn't really have, I guess, somebody specific to kind of go out with them to try to help these people out.
So my name's Tom, and I am fortunate to serve as CEO for Old Public Community Services. And I've been in this work now with homelessness in Tucson for about 13 years. Prior to that, I had a career working as an addiction counselor, so I kind of came from that therapist route. I want to just talk a little bit about what's going on from my perspective, I guess, and just show love for the people that are up here, because the bottom line is I have some things to actually say when I go around, like a circuit preacher with this stuff. I have a stump speech, right? So I have some things I'm going to say that aren't so exciting to some folks, and some that are exciting to some folks. But I just don't want it to sound like I'm poo-pooing anyone who's doing this work, because this is hard work, and people put in a lot of hours, and they dedicate and take risks. every day to go out there and do this, and so I really respect what people do and thank them for everything they're doing. So Housing First, I became infected with the idea of Housing First about 13 years ago because I picked up a newspaper the first day I was in this job, because I thought that's what CEOs would do. I'd never been a CEO. You would read the newspaper and drink coffee and things. So I read the newspaper, and the first thing I saw was that the police had found someone who had been murdered at the De Anza Drive-In Theater, right? It used to be the movie theater there. The guy used to live at behind that theater. He was a veteran. He had alcoholism. He had mental illness and depression. He had been in and out of treatment programs and had been kicked out of his last housing and treatment program because he went back to drinking, and then was murdered and buried at the De Anza. And what was really struck me was there was this statement, and it stuck with me. I still have this picture on my bulletin board today to remind me why I do what I do. A family member of his said he would rather be drinking than be in housing. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that was entirely opposite. We as a system, as a community, would rather he be homeless than to let him in housing when he's drinking. Because he has alcoholism. This is a disease. This is a disorder accepted by the APA and the AMA as a medical condition. And we as a system, and I use that as a big we, didn't let him in the front door. We recently had someone that was in the newspaper that had been murdered downtown. Same thing, alcoholism. How many places wouldn't allow this person to go into shelter, had empty beds that same night because that person was drinking? It's a sad truth, but it's the truth. It is real, and it's what's happening, and this is what drives me every day, and where I am just excited and fascinated about Housing First. The other thing that I learned about Housing First early on was something I didn't realize, and that is that we can end chronic homelessness. I had no idea we could end chronic homelessness. I was born in '65, which for some that'll be old or young, whichever. And I remember downtown, I lived in Phoenix, in front of the Capitol, people were living in tents in the early '80s. It was the first time we'd seen that because the economy was so bad. They've been living in tents since then. We emptied our state hospitals, we defunded our treatment programs, we defunded our community mental health, and people have been living in tents ever since, but they didn't used to before. This is not normal. This is abnormal, and we can end chronic homelessness. So, that's my early kind of stump speech. I was told I couldn't do slides, so what I did, I was off for a few days, I put every slide I loved on a piece of paper. So I just found a way to cheat, right? So there's more on this that I could say. And I think it's more important that you have question time. So I'll just mention a few highlights. And one is that, so we were infected with this, and we fully, about 5 years ago, took on Housing First as our primary model and the mission to end chronic homelessness. It sounds very audacious, but since then, we've been able to get a little over 3,600 households into housing. And through evaluation from Arizona State University, from RAND Corporation, funded in grants through the city and the county, we've had these evaluators report that with this, we're able to get twice as many people into housing than traditional shelter models, and we're able to get, I'll have to get this right, 3 times as many to remain in housing. In Housing First, you can take people who are highly chronically homeless, who have persistent medical and mental health conditions, and you'll see them out of the, if you put them in an apartment, provide them wraparound services, but don't demand them to do anything more than you would any other tenant, you'll find that about 75 to 90% are still out of the homeless system in the 2-year mark. And what's really neat about that is that's normal. I love to tell people that about OPCS, like, you know, we're so proud of what we do, but that's what we're supposed to get if we follow this model. That's not something abnormal. That's the normal outcome if you follow the science and the evidence-based model. So what are some of the challenges we face in doing this work, and that I would say as constituents, as people in this community, should be concerned about as citizens here, is that one of the challenges we have is, you'll notice I put this nice, well, it doesn't look like a bridge. It would be better if it was a little bigger, but it's a bridge, basically. If you took this paper and you folded it in half across the line, you'd find 2 sides. One is managing chronic homelessness, is what we've been doing since the 1980s, and the other side is solving chronic homelessness. In managing chronic homelessness, we built lots of systems and pieces of bridges to end out of homelessness, but they don't connect. Individually, they're brilliant. You can see on there that you've got the Golden Gate Bridge, you've got the Brooklyn Bridge, you've got that nice little bridge that's in Central Park. I'm not from New York, I don't know why I did so many New York ones. And you've got this beautiful covered bridge, it's probably from like Tennessee or something. They're all by themselves are great. And what we used to do is we'd have luncheons every year pre-COVID. That's one of the nice things of COVID, I don't have to do luncheons anymore. And we would all get up there and say what great things we did. And then I, to be good, would go to my friend CEOs' luncheons and I'd hear what great things they would do. Then I'd go back to TPCH and our continuum of care and I'd find out that homelessness increased. Well, there's no way we could all be doing great if homelessness is going up. But we all are working very hard. The problem is that historically we've put together bridges that don't match. We put together systems in where we say we like it this way, another agency gets funding and they like it that way, another group comes along and they like it that way. But for the person trying to get out of homelessness, it's a bridge that doesn't connect. Some people are strong enough to get over that bridge, and we applaud them. But that's not the average person who's chronically homeless. Those folks typically cycle in and out of housing. And then when you approach them and you say, hey, I'd like to help you, they say no thank you. Because they have been over and fallen off that bridge so many times, why in the world should they give up everything they have to go through it again? So what we propose, and what I really think I want to highlight in my last minute or so, I think I had 7 minutes, right? But I think I'm taking some of these other minutes. The other side of it is, you'll see on the other side is what we call solving homelessness. And in there you've got this nice bridge, and I think goes over the Rialto or something. Nothing against this bridge, but it's not flashy, right? It's a bridge, it gets you from point A to point B. But it's solid. You can get from one end to the other. The city, the county, numerous nonprofits are working together today, and we're going to have to do a lot more of it to put that kind of bridge together. So when we are out there on our side doing our outreach with El Real Healthcare, and we're meeting people that are homeless, and we're able to get them into a low barrier bridge housing over at the Wildcat Inn that the city's running, then when they're over there, we can have the homeless work program, which is funded by the city, come over there and give them immediate low barrier work where they don't have to have ID, they don't have to prove who they are, they get paid cash that day to help them get out of homelessness, and then they're able to get into funding for a voucher to get into a permanent housing. And they don't have to leave there until the housing is ready, because it's no good having them there 3 weeks if then they have to leave and then start all over again. And that may sound obvious, but we've done that for 40 some years. We've done that kind of model. So it's going to take time to get us out of this model. But this group here in the city and in the county right now has a task force on affordable housing. We're at a fantastic time to be able to do this. And I think my message for people is to be aware of the fact that there's two models, that there is a solution to homelessness. And the more you're aware of it, the more you can demand it, the more you can question how it should be, where it should be, and you can get people to do it. The other piece of it that I think is just a truth that I'll say is some of this bridge that I put on here is just unfunded. Bottom line is, if you're going to build, I live, my wife has horses, and the horses and her come together, so it was very clear. And so we live, when we moved to Tucson, the only place we could really buy land was out in Vail. So we live out in Vail, towards Sahuarita. And they put that really cool overpass on Houghton Road. And it's really cool. You don't have to make a left turn in front of traffic. Once you get used to it, it's really cool. I forget what it's called. My wife always calls it the Flying V. It's not what it's called, but that's what she calls it. So, but what we're doing in homelessness is we're often saying, well, we can fund, HUD has never funded more than about 50% of what's needed, that they know is needed for housing. Almost all your money for housing comes from the federal government in one way or another. It may go through the city, it may go through a county, but it comes from the federal government, from your federal taxes. And if you fund 50% of it, you don't get a whole bridge. It's just the way it is. There's no way to, we may be the soft sciences, but we ain't that soft, right? If you pay for 50% of the overpass in Houghton, you don't get a whole overpass. It's not how it works. And so I think there's a real need to push to say, no, we need to fund this. Then we need to fund it in a smart way, and we need to fund it in a way that we can say, you know what, we're going to get somewhere, and we're going to do things that are smart and get results, and are compassionate and kind, but get results. The other thing I want to say is that I'm not, it may sound like I've gone to the Church of Housing First, and I sort of have, but it's just science, right? In 5 years, we'll be hitting ourselves up the head going, why weren't we doing Housing First too, right? Why did we do this? Why? It's okay, it's science. It needs to keep changing. I don't want to get, to where I just believe in one model or another. And for about 15% of the people out there, Housing First won't work for them. But for 85% of the people, it will. So when you talk about a public intervention of health, you want to do what's going to work. When you've got a pain in your elbow, you don't go right to MRIs and cancer treatments, right? So we want to do the easiest, straightforward, cheapest way to try and get the biggest intervention, and then put those extra things for that other 15%. So that's my stump speech. I can almost say it in my sleep. But the other thing is that OPCS is thrilled to be partner here, of course, and this is a great opportunity for me and for our agency, because we're trying to move away from a charity model. We've been around 26 years, and move more into a community model and a solidarity model. And we are looking for community members who might be interested. At the end of this year, we'll be forming a community advisory board so that we can hear from the community. I imagine the people here, if you're like me, one of the reasons you're here is you want safe neighborhoods. You don't want people living in your neighborhood in the washes, and that's not in opposition to what we do. A lot of nonprofits, we got caught in this whole, NIMBYism and whatnot. No one wants this in their backyard. No one wants this. We need to work together to try and fix this. And there isn't one against the other, and we want to have the community, and we want to have people who are homeless and have been homeless involved in the process. So that's a lot of information. Thank you very much.
There was a few things that were lightly touched on that I think is important for everybody to understand. We talked about the VSPDAT and the scoring and being matched to housing, high score, low score. Those are some details that are very important and also affect, like Kelly mentioned, somebody was very quickly matched in a week and somebody was matched after a year. And so why and how, what does that mean? So Jason is going to very kindly go over that for us.
So I'm happy to provide a little bit of clarity there, and thanks so much, Kelly, for bringing some of these items up. So if we were to go back in time about 6 years and then look for the past 40 years before that, right? If someone is unsheltered and needed a resource, the way that they would find that is to need to figure out, okay, what are all of the organizations in town that maybe run a housing program for me, like a transitional housing program, and then call each of those organizations, right, and say, tell their whole story, kind of unzip all that trauma to that person, and then likely be told, we don't have anything, call me back next Tuesday, right, and then often barriers were put in place. This is all pre-Housing First, and I love nonprofit partners, but as a member of that community for a long time, we made some bad decisions back in the day. And so one was like, we would say to folks, you have to come to life skills classes for 3 weeks before we'll let you come into housing, or you have to do these things to prove you're ready, right? And this idea of housing readiness. And so Housing First really was that shift to say every human is housing ready. That doesn't mean every person is ready to manage their, to have no support, but every person's ready to have a home. And so the other piece of that we recognize is how traumatic it is to constantly tell the same story and not get help, and how that results in people eventually going, look, I've done this. I've called 15 agencies, I called them every Tuesday, I jumped through the hoops, I didn't get housed, I'm done, I'm just staying out here, right? And so several years ago, a new model was created. It's known sort of locally and nationally as coordinated entry. And so the idea is that instead of every organization maintaining its own sort of wait list, every community, and this is true across the country, every community is using their any HUD funds, as well as any other programs that serve folks who are experiencing homelessness that are willing to participate in the process, does one housing assessment. So there are a network of locations throughout the community where someone can call or go and say, I'm in need of housing, can tell their story one time. That's done through this tool that Kelly was mentioning called the VSPDAT, and that there's a scoring model that results in a referral. And so coordinated entry is very different than traditional wait lists. It doesn't put any person on a list that says, you're number 34 in line for housing, and so we'll keep in touch when your number comes up. Coordinated entry is really priority based. So and folks have pointed to this, right? We know from a data perspective that we are about 4,000 units shy of the supportive housing we need in our community to respond to homelessness. So you hear all the time in the media about number of folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. We're seeing it. We see homelessness in a much more visible way since the beginning of the pandemic than we ever have, right, locally. What we aren't really talking about a lot of the time is the 3,500 plus people who are sleeping in an apartment or a shelter bed every night in Tucson that is being supported through these programs. And so we know, though, we need double that, right? We're about 4,000 short. And so coordinated entry is really crisis triage. And so what it says is when a housing opening becomes available, we're going to house the next person who is the most likely to die on the streets. But the reality is we are resourced to prevent death on the streets. That's the extent that the federal government has resourced housing in local communities. And I think the city's done an amazing job recently, mayor and council, of investing new local resources to expand that. But right now, generally speaking, your everyday, like just an average person who's struggling and down on their luck is not going to get housed through that system simply because there aren't enough resources. So this one assessment creates a priority pool, and then from that, the person who's the most vulnerable gets the next housing referral. So someone could be next on the list today, and then 4 people show up tomorrow that are much more vulnerable. Someone, an older adult with ongoing health concerns that put them at high risk of COVID, things like that, a family fleeing domestic abuse. And those households are going to be prioritized sooner. And so what we see then are sometimes households that may get housed, to Kelly's point, in 1 week, and that is absolutely not the norm. We know the norm, honestly, is that most people experiencing homelessness solve their crisis on their own. It is not solved through a housing program. And for folks who do get housed, it can take any length of time. It could be more than a year. And so as you're talking to folks, if you're, there's a camp near your house, and you want to say, hey, I know about this resource. We love to show those stories of that success of like, yes, this person got in a week. But we also never want to set that expectation because the reality of resources is limited. So in the very back, there were small, like 4-fold flyers that said need help on the front. Those are a list of all sorts of great resources in town for folks who are unsheltered. And in there, you'll see somewhere it will say coordinated entry assessment. So if you need to help someone get connected to housing resources, they can call any one of the phone numbers on that coordinated entry assessment list and schedule to do that housing assessment that Kelly was talking about. They only have to do it one time, and then that opens up all of the housing opportunities that are available in the community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. We are going to move into our question portion. We ask that remind that this is not a moment to hash out personal grievances or experiences that require specific responses to your specific situation. And we ask that everybody remain respectful by not talking over each other. We'll go ahead and get started. Any questions? We'll start with Kevin.
The work that's being done by this team is just outstanding, and it's great to hear that there's work in place. This team and everybody else who's involved can't do the work without the support, the direct support and prioritization by the City Council, the County Board of Supervisors, and I also noticed that we don't have any representative by the City Attorney's Office and the County Attorney's Office, because I'm sure that there's a component here as part of the solution, especially with drug abuse and dealing with the chronic drug abusers that you can't get off the street. I don't know how to deal with that. But what is the current City Council's direction to all the departments as to the priority and what instructions are they getting and support are they getting?
So the question was, what direction is everybody getting on behalf of mayor and council?
Should I take that one? Okay.
Has that actually come up in council meetings, that there's a coordinated effort and funding, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if Councilmember Dahl is still here, he would probably be the best to speak to this. But first of all, mayor and council made it a priority to stand up a Housing First program and the Community Safety, Health, and Wellness program, right? Saying, hey, we're not bringing all of the resources to the table that we need to really be able to bolster the work that our nonprofit partners are doing. So how do we really work to fill in some of those gaps, right? And create spaces for just more fluid, coordination, I guess is how I would say it, right? So in addition to what is already happening through coordinated entry, right? That also means too that there's been some additional funds put forward to support that work, both through the general fund as well as some of the recovery dollars. So You know, the reason why Brandy is able to run the Wildcat as a transitional shelter and help get people out of camps into shelter until they are ready to get into permanent housing is because we were able to buy that property out of direction from mayor and council, really going back to 2020, right? So, you know, a lot of this work has been planted for a while. Sometimes it takes a little bit for those seeds. You know you know this because, you know, Kevin has served on a school board for a long time. So, you know, sometimes it can take a little while to get everything moving. But we really are moving really well now. And that would not have happened had it not been from the direction of mayor and council to say, we really want to get out of the business of managing homelessness to solving homelessness. What do we bring to the table? How do we think about our strategic investments, right, that we are making with a lot of the nonprofits who are providing emergency shelter, et cetera, that Jason really manages a lot of that piece. How do we bring that in? How do we bring improved efforts with our coordinated entry system and Tucson Pima Coalition to End Homelessness? And then how do we also build out some additional programming that is based within the city that can be a bit more nimble, right, to respond as needed. So I hope that answers, Kevin.
The only other thing is, what about the city attorney's office and the county attorney's office? Are they involved in any way in supporting you and in your needs, especially the police department?
Yeah, I'll let Captain Shainer respond to that, but
Yeah, so absolutely. We frequently work with the city attorney and the county attorney's office to implement new programs and to essentially have that approval. For example, our deflection program, it does give us the discretion under certain circumstances to forego entry into the criminal justice system and diverting individuals to the treatment system without even filing charges. We're not holding charges over their head. And we're trying that program in conjunction with research partners, so we can look at it at the end and really determine is what we're doing helping? Are we having successes, or what do we need to change? I mean, Tom really hit it on the head. You know, right now he's gone to the church of Housing First, but 5 years from now it might be Housing First too, right? There's different components. We're always trying new things, and what this group over the last couple of years, I was lucky enough to come into groups that had already created these relationships, and now we get to further more with the new programs, is that we come to the table. And we don't always agree, but we come to the table and we talk about ideas. And we don't take no for an answer. We talk through it and we try to figure out what do we need to do, talk to the community quite a bit and get that information. But we can't do any of that without support from the city attorney's office and the county attorney's office to say, yes, that's a legal response.
We're gonna go ahead, I got handed a card as well, so I'm gonna read one from the card and then I'll get one from the audience. The question is, what is the cleanup? How is it determined what is someone's possessions versus trash? They just don't have somewhere to put it like we do, question mark?
You're right. You know, somebody has belongings. Who says what's trash and what's not? I mean, we go out to homeless camps and speak to individuals. It might even be somebody that's sheltered but has a bag or a purse full of items, and we have to go through that inventory, what's there, before we take them to jail, for example, right? I might look through that purse and say, well, that's trash, that's trash, that's trash, let's get rid of it. But in the end, it might be important to that individual. So whether or not something is trash is really determined by the individual. When it becomes kind of an easy fix for us is if it's abandoned. So if somebody, you know, literally abandoned something, leaves it behind, then it can be cleaned up. But otherwise, it's up to the individual. They define what their possessions are and the importance that they have.
Thank you. Go ahead and go. Sorry, I can't read your name tag, but you are here in the third row. Go ahead.
Two really quick questions. One, so some of us do neighborhood newsletters. Is there anything that you would prefer that we didn't put into the newsletter? Or can I kind of summarize who was here and kind of what you said? So
Yeah.
It's pretty
Public
good.
forum,
Go for it. And
it.
Gretchen, I
Yeah.
know you have some of our emails too, so if you want any additional information, we're happy to provide that.
That's my second question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is there, and I even wrote it down, but is there any website showing a chart of all these agencies and who reports to whom? And you mentioned you were the umbrella organization. I tried looking at TPD's website once because every now and then on the news or something I'd hear, oh, there's a new bureau, and it wasn't even easy for me to find the new bureaus. So is there sort of a master genealogy chart of all these agencies?
There are elements, there's multiple actually, and I have to apologize because they're not all on our website right now because we're in the process of revamping our website. So we're going to have a new website out, I think in a month or two. And so some of this is just waiting on that fresh rollout, but I can certainly send you those, Gretchen.
Okay, I'll email you.
And anyone who's here who would like something similar, feel free to buzz in my ear afterwards and either give me your email or I can give you mine. But you can also follow up with the ward office too, and they can connect with us and we can make sure that you get that.
We'll be sending out a follow-up email with everybody's contact information and the questions that we have left over and then the answers as well, so that everybody has the questions and the answers and all the contact information. Another question over here, Hennessy?
Hi everyone. My name's Genesis. I come from the mayor's office. I'm the community engagement advisor, but I wanted to piggyback on the first question. Let's not forget we have our city court, and we just elected 2 new city magistrates that do a lot of work with our homeless population in terms of homeless court. They're trying to set up different community programs, so that can also be a resource, and I can get you that information, Marlene.
I would love that, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll make sure to include that information. Thank you so much, Hennessy.
Thanks for that, Hennessy. And so, and to piggyback, right, so we're currently in the process too of kind of looking at our specialty courts, which the city runs. And the way that the specialty courts work, for those of you who aren't familiar, is they use a restorative justice approach. And so they are utilizing oftentimes the appropriate services, right, that can assist someone based on whatever the issue was that got them into the court, right? So it looks different depending on which specialty court you're talking about. But one of the courts right now that we're in the process of investigating kind of how to launch is a community court. And I know Captain Shainer and I are both really excited to see how that court can better support some of the work that these teams are doing. And really allow for just an additional tool to bring into the mix, right, to help connect people with the supportive services that they need. Thanks for flagging that, Hennessy.
I'll go ahead right here. Christina?
Yes.
Okay, I'll ask you to stand, please. Thank you.
And I probably need to do this, if that's okay.
Thank you.
My question has to do with vacant lots. Our neighborhood has a lot of vacant lots. And so they become an area where the unhoused can find housing, but that's not the best solution. And a lot of the property is privately owned. And so they're not fenced, there's like this one lot, they put up no trespassing, and the next day the sign is gone. I go in other neighborhoods in the city and I see these beautiful fences and no trespassing. So how can we as residents of our neighborhood work with who of you to help us get the landowners, the property owners, to fence these vacant lots and put no trespassing? That would help us, I think.
Do you want me to take this one?
It's up to you.
So this is actually a great question for your ward office.
I'll still let you take it.
Do you want me to
Very
switch it here? And we actually, so I think, there's at least kind of 2 avenues that come to my mind, but I'm sure in this room there might be others that I'm not thinking of. There is, first of all, if you have vacant lots that are not being appropriately maintained, right? Which is typically the case with what you're describing. That is a code violation. We have a really remarkable code inspector back in the back. Sorry for putting you on the spot there. But so you absolutely can report that lot to code enforcement. They can follow up, and so then what they do is they follow up with the owner right? Let them know that there has been a complaint filed, ask them to take steps to remedy it, right? And then it can result in a citation and kind of further action as needed. So that's kind of one path. The other path that I think some of you may have seen be effective, but really depends on kind of who the players are, is, you know, sometimes a neighborhood association might send a letter to the owner, and your ward office can certainly help you identify who the owner is. And so you can kind of do a, hey, we have realized X, there's some challenges here, we want to help be part of the solution, how can we work with you to help resolve these issues, right? So that's kind of another approach. And, you know, I don't want to place any value judgments on which is right or not. Bottom line, if you have an unwilling participant in the, you know, landowner, then you may have to go the code enforcement direction regardless, right? So, is that anything else that I missed that folks want to chime in with?
Yeah, just touch base. One thing we do at TBD, especially my unit, we will try to get with the owners and recommend kind of like a SEPTED evaluation, which is crime prevention through environmental design, because sometimes it's very hard. You've got these 50-acre lots down at Wilmot and Los Reales where you're not going to be able to fence that, right? And so we'll, you know, kind of talk to them about moving some dirt so they can't get, if anybody knows First and Limberlost, that area there's got a vacant lot that they fenced off, and then there's another one by Stone and Limberlost where they put a big berm so you can't drive cars on there. Stuff like that is helpful. But we usually try to work with the local division and get these letter of trespassing signed, because, you know, sometimes they are neglected lots, but the other times it's just so much for them to keep maintaining over and over again, and the homeless just keep getting back on there. So we always offer outreach, obviously, but it's nice to also have an easy way to have a letter of trespassing so we can actually keep in contact with the owner, and that goes into our database so that any officer has that owner's information and kind of keep them up to date. Say, hey, you had a camp on this lot, and just let them know, because sometimes they're living in different states. But like she said, like Sarah said, there's no right or wrong, but it's all on, you know, which route you prefer to take. And I don't know if code enforcement can verify this, but I don't think that they can force somebody to fence a lot. I'm not sure if that's in their purview as well, so I don't know. I know that there's stuff about weeds and trash and whatnot, but I'm not sure if you can actually enforce a fencing of the lot. We usually recommend it when it's something that is feasible, though.
So our next question is, I have met several homeless who indicated they have family. Is there any outreach to help families cope with their homeless loved ones? Are there any resources that you can point us towards that deal with that?
And help families connect with their
resources.
So if they're like, so I understand the question, like if they have family, they're trying to reconnect with their family?
Or maybe the experience of having a homeless loved one and how to personally support them, or how to have that in your life. Any resources for that?
No, we get that once in a while, and we're more than happy to talk with. Anyone can contact our main number and ask our front desk, our screener, to talk, and we would definitely, you can also reach out to me directly to my email, and I'm more than happy to talk with people. But I don't know of a specific organization that has a focus on that. Seems like
that would be a great benefit. Yeah, somebody start that, please, and let us know. Yeah. Another question from the audience. I'll go over here.
Somebody mentioned landlords and vouchers. What happened to the voucher system? Like 2 days ago, a woman called me, homeless, from the base. She said she had a $1,000 voucher and no one will accept her voucher. And she's been living on the street for 2 weeks. What happened to that system? Is it not helping them, or is it the landlord? Sorry.
No, absolutely. This is a very real problem, which I think is why you just saw sort of the smiles among all of us. So a couple of things, right? So the voucher program not only continues to exist, has expanded, and within the city, we've both doubled the number of vouchers that we dedicate specifically to folks.
Can you also explain what the voucher is?
Absolutely, thank you. So vouchers, so the Housing Choice Voucher Program is what most folks know is Section 8. So is everyone has some familiarity with Section 8? Okay. So the Section 8 program, now referred to as Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is a permanent housing subsidy for very low-income individuals. And it's community-based rental. So instead of public housing, which is more folks moving into properties that are owned by a housing authority like the city, housing choice vouchers allow folks to rent in communities of their choice, right? And so we know that that deconcentrates poverty, which is good for neighborhoods. We also know that it allows people to remain connected to the resource networks that they have, right? So if we say to someone who's very low income, escaping homelessness, we'll provide housing for you, but it's over here, and you've always lived, right, if you've always lived on the southwest side, and now we say you're moving to 85705 because that's where our public housing available for you is, right? Like that person may be connected to an AA group that's on the south side that they've been at every day, maybe connected to a therapist, to school, family, friends, religious groups, whatever. And so voucher programs allow folks to stay connected to where they are. In the last couple of years, we've seen a few significant challenges. The first, and I think anyone who's been watching real estate prices as an owner or a renter knows, Tucson's housing market has gone nuts in the last 2 years. And so where we have historically been, and still are, one of the most affordable communities in the country, we are not even close. We're one of the worst, least affordable communities in the country when we balance income to housing cost. And so what we've seen is these housing prices are increasing. Housing choice voucher, the amount that can be paid for a subsidy, has not increased at the same pace. It's increased, but it doesn't keep pace. And so most of the landlords who would previously rent to programs like the Housing Choice Voucher programs, also to the programs that these folks administer, Community Bridges, Old Pueblo, that provide services for folks experiencing homelessness. HUD caps the amount that can be spent monthly on rent, and the rents have increased above that, so there's that. Then additionally, because the housing market has become so aggressive right now and so tight, folks are able to be much more selective about their tenants. And so so many landlords are screening tenants out that may receive a housing voucher, and a lot of that is either just sort of even like an unconscious discrimination around Section 8 and beliefs about poverty, beliefs about homelessness that results in that. And then, and for other folks, we know that many of the people that we're housing do come with complex histories, and those histories tend to show up on rap sheets, tend to show up in evictions. So they are not the most appealing tenant option to a landlord. And so the city's done a lot of work over the last few years to try to address that. One is in our public housing and housing choice voucher programs, changing the way that our processes for rental payments. For a long time, it also just takes a long time as a landlord to get paid if you're going through a program versus if it's just a tenant who has to have their rent paid by the first of the month. So shortening the time period that folks have to wait has been an aim there. Additionally, we've created landlord incentive programs that allow us to pay sign-on bonuses for landlords that are willing to work with our tenants. I think the most compelling thing, work that's been done and is being mayor and council has considered and we're continuing to work through, is really pushing toward a source of income protection ordinance in the city. And so source of income protection is an anti-discrimination ordinance that if put in place says that a property owner cannot discriminate against a potential tenant based on the source of their income, including any subsidy, right? So if you have rental subsidy, that has to be counted toward income calculation and can't be a disqualifier. That's a current, that is something we're working on, and there are considerations there about how that would play with state legislature. So certainly not a shoe-in deal, but a part of our housing affordability strategy. It's something that's really dear to all of us and believe addresses this key issue.
We'll take another question. I'll go right there in the back.
Okay.
With the clipboard.
Hey everyone, I'm John. I'm a local business owner here in Tucson. I'm off of Grand and Oracle. I've definitely seen a ramp up in homelessness. I've owned the property now for 5 years. Been born and raised here. So I guess my question kind of leads to crime. I definitely understand it's a complex problem. I see it firsthand every day with all different walks of life, all different stories. And I'm just curious is there a plan in place to help the city and business owners and neighborhoods to help kind of curb some of the drug issues that we have been seeing and vandalism and so forth? And you know, if there's someone that I can help contact to kind of help bring that to the table a little bit closer, I'm definitely willing to do so. But I was just curious about that because, you know, I see ODs constantly, you know, it's basically an open air drug market, and it's, you know, it's scary for my staff, it's scary for me, and it's hard to walk into that every day. And I don't want to have to move to Oro Valley. I love Tucson, you know, it's my home. So I was just curious about what are the next steps as far as helping to curb some of that? Because I think it would help you guys find the right people for housing and to help differentiate some of the people that are willing and able to accept those types of resources. And of course, there's some that, you know, will deny us whatever opportunity we present them because of, you know, drugs and other issues that come along with it.
So I'll touch on that a little bit. And we've got Officer Hould back here from Operations Division West, so he knows very well your specific area there at Grant and Oracle has been a chronic hotspot for criminal activity. Unfortunately, in the city, there are some of those chronic hotspots. What the data shows is for violent crime, the chronic hotspots it's a very small percentage of land, and the crimes are committed by a very small number of people within those areas. But what we're trying to figure out is the chronic portion of it. Because we can go in there and we can flood the area with officers, but at some point they have to move on to the next spike in crime that comes up, right? So it's not a sustainable solution. And so one of the things that the new Bureau is doing that they've been working on at the Tucson Police Department for years is trying to find sustainable solutions. And I mention Officer Holt because he's been doing this for years, and Team 2, really single-handedly trying to find sustainable solutions to problems. So Grant and Oracle being one of them. I know when I worked over there as a district lieutenant, there were coalitions of business owners in that area, so there were regular meetings and conversations, and they looked at structural changes to the area. I know they made the traffic change to address some traffic collision issues. I know on the southwest side there at 11th and Flores, Officer Poole spearheaded an idea of limiting traffic through the area to kind of slow down that open air drug market. Working with the businesses in the area to try to set up CPTED type principles of crime prevention through environmental design. If you make an area undesirable for a certain activity, it can help reduce that activity, and that is more sustainable than flooding the area with a police officer. So a variety of those efforts are ongoing. I know there was a drug market intervention program out of Operations Division West. That model can be used elsewhere as well as focused deterrence. And what those types of models do is they focus the enforcement on the individuals that are responsible specifically for the crime. So when you talk about drug users, homeless, you've got your open air drug markets, and you've got people that have a disease, right? The users that can't cope, but they're not necessarily the criminals, right? So we look differently at the person that's engaging in the sales and offer the outreach to the individuals that are using. We've used that model in conjunction with the divisions throughout the city to address certain hotspots on a variety of instances, and had quite a bit of success. And really what we do with that is also include the neighborhoods to kind of maintain that sustainability piece and that communication, so that if problems start to come back, we can open that door for communication and operation again to try to address that. So while obviously it's not a light switch, it's not something I can turn on and off, something that's not a simple solution. We are aware of a lot of those, and we're taking efforts to try to mitigate some of those chronic crime hotspots.
Thank you. Are you getting the support from the city attorney's office and the county attorney's office to address people so that they have personal accountability for repeated offenses, so that TPD is not dealing with the same people over and over again, getting arrested and taken and let out? Are you getting support from the city and county attorney's office?
Yeah, so the simple answer to that is yes. Obviously, there's more to that, and that yes comes with a lot of work, right, and a lot of communication. So just like we are trying to implement evidence-based practices, so are other entities within the city, being the courts, being the county attorney's office, these groups here. We're trying to try new things that have evidence-based support behind them to show success, sometimes you realize in that process that, hey, we showed some success here, but it's having a negative effect over here, right? So, the county attorney's office has made some decisions over the last year, and, when we've gone back to the county attorney and said, are you aware of these kind of consequences that are coming out of it? They've been very open to those discussions, and they've made changes, and they've come out and said, hey, that maybe wasn't the smartest of things to do, right? So, on that, the other thing that we do is we use data to track high utilizers, but also individuals that are engaged in criminal activity. And a lot of times it takes quite a bit of focus, right? We call them maybe a staffing session or something like that. We'll bring in meetings, and it could be on a single individual. And you have all these individuals in the room, as well as attorneys, you have department heads, and we sit down and we're discussing the problems of a single person, right? It seems like a lot of effort, but sometimes that's necessary. And in that, not only are we trying to provide the best service to that individual so we can reduce the use of the criminal justice system, it also allows us to learn more about each other's programs and kind of figure out where those gaps are and fix those.
So I'm going to read off one last question, and it's almost 7. So if you have a question, please write it on a note card and include your contact information. We will be sending it out to everyone that has signed up on our sign-in, so everybody will see everyone's questions and everyone's answers. The last question is there room at the Wildcat Inn? How does someone find shelter there?
You're welcome to reach out to me and Brandy Champion's the name. So you're welcome to reach out to me on a daily basis to see if we have availability. People are transitioning out, so we should have some availability coming up.
Yeah, so, the long and short is that it shifts every day.
Yes.
Right? So, right now, it's not like there's a bunch of empty beds at Wildcat, right? Like, as soon as they're available, they're filled. But there are always constantly folks that are being transitioned out because they're being connected with housing resources. So it's constantly moving. Yeah. So.
Thank you, everybody, for your time this evening. There's obviously a lot of heart behind this work. We appreciate all of your time. I will be sending out the follow-up email. Please make sure you leave questions here with us with your contact information. Reach out to us for anything. Thank you.